Okay, welcome to the Principle 5 panel. We have two panelists today, Esther and JP. And we have a couple of questions, and the format for this is that they'll each take a few minutes to answer the first question, then they'll each take a few minutes to answer the second question, etc. And then we'll open it up for questions and answers and discussion. Our hope is really that this is an opportunity to share information about how co-ops do education, how we can improve our education, and what we can learn from each other about education. So without any further ado, I'll introduce the first question, and maybe you guys can also introduce yourselves as you answer it. The first question is, what education does your co-op do for new members? I don't know which of you wants to go first.
You can go, Julian, if you like.
Thanks, Esther. My name is JP. I'm at Union Cab Cooperative. I'm currently the sitting vice president of the board of directors, and I also work in a number of other roles. I'm the administrative assistant to the business manager and work as a sales and marketing representative, and also do some HR. So I wear a bunch of hats. So I guess when we first get hires in, we teach them about the job to begin with, and then we have a class that we call democracy class, which talks about the history of cooperatives and about the history of our own cooperative, and about our peer review system, which is a pretty unique and interesting disciplinary system for a large business. Apart from that, we have opportunities. I guess the other thing that we do is, which I suppose sort of fits into education, is that we have all of the people that join us come to either a committee meeting or a board meeting so that they can get it kind of acquainted with the way that we make decisions as worker owners. Let's see, we have some, now that things kind of ground to a halt because of the pandemic, and we've had a really interesting experience, not initiating, what's the word I'm looking for? Orienting new workers here because of not being able to be together in the same room for almost 2 years, and trying to figure out which ways we can kind of offer remote learning. And it's been really difficult to coordinate, and we have come up with some interesting ways to handle that, but a lot of it has been on halt. We have an education committee that is a standing committee of the board of directors that works out trainings and facilitates all of our elections. And there are a lot more things that we'd like to offer, but at the moment, when you're first here, you get to have peer-on-peer training about not just the cooperative, but the job, and also that class that sort of gets your feet wet learning about the cooperative movement and about our own cooperative. So I will yield to Esther.
Well, thank you. My name is Esther West, and let's see here. I'm currently a worker owner of the Ajani Cooperative, which is a new worker-owned co-op, and I'm part of MedWork and also on the board of the U.S. Federation of Worker Co-ops. But I'll mostly be talking about my experience with Equal Exchange. I was at Equal Exchange for 5 years and was their education committee co-chair for a while and did different roles in that. So at Equal Exchange, there was the worker owner track members, And then there was ongoing education and engagement, as mentioned in other co-ops too. And so with the ongoing education, you could use paid. We had paid 10% time, where people could use 10% of their paid time towards cooperative or industry education, as long as their manager approved it. So that could be used towards going to a conference, or we had weekly educational times. And then for people on worker owner track, as well as, and you know, like this is also engaging other people too, but worker owners had to complete a checklist of things before they were approved as members. And so there were a lot of orientations to, you know, what it means to be a worker owner or to be on the board. There were hour-long exchange times, educational exchange times every Thursday that would address various co-op or fair trade or social justice or other issues, have guest speakers, peer-to-peer learning. We had a curriculum. We had a member manual that included things like rights and responsibilities that people sign. There was a library, and then there's like a mentor buddy system. And then again, there was this education committee to ensure that there was a place held for these things to happen and to make sure there was responsibility, you know, accountability that education was going on.
Cool. Thank you both. So the next question is about ongoing members and what education or training you do for ongoing members. Yeah, so I guess we can go in the same order.
Okay. So currently we have very few offerings with continuing ed for members once they're here. And that's one of the things that we're working hard on building back now that the pandemic is starting to allow us to have a little bit more of the old-fashioned normalcy. We have the EdCom here has a library as well. So people have access to information that they need. And we've tried to make sure that as a part of our peer review system of discipline here, that if there are ways that we can train people because of things going wrong, I guess that's one of the ways that we really translate education into action here, where if there are problems with operational work or interpersonal conflict, we try to work really hard to help people build job skills that will help them be successful here and anywhere that they work in the future. We have a lot of opportunities that we want to start offering at this point in sort of the area of diversity and equity and inclusion. It seems like there are a number of areas where continuing education, not only professionally, but as a way to develop personally as a worker owner, need to be offered here. Because one of the benefits of being at a worker cooperative is education. And we often pay a little bit of a co-op tariff, and our wages being lower than the industry standard, and you know, the work being a little bit more rigorous. And one of the things that we can offer as a cooperative is to provide education for professional development and personal development. And that's one of the things that we're hoping to really invest in the coming months. At the moment, I'm sad to say that we haven't been able to offer a lot of that because of having so few resources through the pandemic, that we've just been a skeleton crew. And it's been interesting to see how through cutting right down to the bones and keeping our co-op operational and keeping our doors open as a business, the ways that we've suffered as a cooperative not being able to offer educational opportunities for our members. And so in a way that's been a good learning experience for us to figure out ways that we need to help our members be continuing education professionally and personally. And I guess I hold with that.
Thank you. Let's see, I already mentioned a few things, so I won't go over those again, but some other things that were for ongoing education were farmer partners or business partners or cooperatives peers would often like visit our workplace, and that often they would talk, or we would do like quality control together or do some sort of like activity together towards our coffee or chocolate or whatever product it was. And then also after a year, after you voted in, you then were expected to go on at least one trip to visit a farmer partner. So that was usually international. Like I got to go to the Dominican Republic and visit the cacao cooperative called Conocado and talk with, stay with farmers and just like get to know each other as people and become friends. And that way you can also bring that to your job and communicate that to your customers better, to partnership building. And you really have this like firsthand experience to bring to your work. There was also ongoing other practices were like ongoing transparency of finances and updates at regular staff meetings or quarterly member meetings with explanations of what things are. And then we could also sit in on board meetings. Once we were members, we could start, learning what's going on. So, that's part of it too. And then there's also like, you were expected to know the product well. So you were expected to go learn about coffee, like do coffee, like learn how to taste coffee or chocolate, which was fun, yeah, so those were some other things. Thank you.
I know JP started to get at this a little bit, but what education do you wish your co-ops did? Like, dream big. What do you wish you could offer or do?
I think that being somewhat powerless over the course of the pandemic let us dream pretty big together. Like we've been able to have a lot of conversations. Well, God, if we could do anything, we'd really love to be able to do, X, Y, and Z. And I think one of the things that kind of has us kneecapped as a business is that because of insurance requirements, we can't hire drivers who are under the age of 25. And that means that we're kind of a little bit stuck with being able to bring people of a certain demographic in. And I think there's a lot of excitement generally lately about the cooperative movement, and especially with the Great Resignation, people really thinking about how their work affects their own personal lives and the world around them. And so we really would love to be able to bring younger people into the fold here. And we've talked about working with Shabazz is an alternative high school here in Madison, Malcolm Shabazz City High School. And we've talked about having sort of an apprenticeship thing with kids who are seniors so that they could come in and learn about cooperative governance as a program. That's something that we would love to be able to do. And when we were talking about sort of alternative sources of revenue that we might be able to offer to the public and be able to make a little bit of money. We were talking about having Union Cab University, which would be like different ways that we could have the public sign up for courses with our cooperative to learn about the cooperative movement, about cooperative governance, about running a business, different ways of being able to sort of help educate the community at large around us. So that's one of the ways. I know that there are a number of ways that we really want to be able to engage our membership in continued education. We've had lately a lot of talk about ways that we can bring ourselves into being a more equitable business and learning about the ways that we can kind of innovate to make ourselves cool, attractive as a business to people who have kind of the same views and values that we share. And one of the things that suffered a lot because of not being able to invest in education over the course of the last 2 years is that we've found that we have a really a bad problem with engagement. We have a lot of people who are feeling very disengaged from their business, from being an owner of their business, and from one another. And I think one of the things that I wish for is being able to, I know that I share this wish with my colleagues, is being able to sort of reignite people's passion in their ownership of our business and in sort of the drive that made them want to come here in the first place, and the differences that that makes in our local economy and the work that we do. So I guess that kind of covers it.
I hear that about, like, trying to keep people engaged and to continue that spark. Like, that was a big issue at Equal as well. And I think like having like pathways for professional development is important too. And that, like, and with that comes a critique of like who's having access to power, like whether it's gender or racial justice issues. So I think it's really important to look at that with who you're, like how you're engaging members in education and professionally. I know that honestly, like that was one of the reasons I left, because I was in the same position 5 years and I kept trying to move up, and it was, I was tired, I wanted to advance in my growth. So to be frank, and I think it's been a minute since I worked there, but I guess some things that I have been thinking about are, and within working with other co-ops through like co-op organizing work and research, is about power, and if the members have power and how education can play a big role in that. And I feel like sometimes education was talked about as something that's just for new members and it's a cultural thing. It doesn't necessarily have meaningful implications for how worker owners impact their own lives through governance. So yeah, I think like, like I think like things that can get in the way are structures. Do you have a good structure for these things? Personality, management versus governance, that those can be attention if you have a traditional management structure. The board versus the worker owner body, if it's a big co-op and not everyone's on the board. And so how do you create strong workers and strong owners and move from cooperative education and culture from surface level to, and language to meaningful power of worker owners. Maybe I have a list of questions I've written down that maybe I could screen share real quick. Is that okay? Cool. Just a second here. So questions are, do worker owners have not only a space to discuss issues, but also a clear process to enact those decisions? If you have a hierarchical management structure, do worker owners tend to discuss issues and vote similarly to their managers, or do they feel comfortable voicing differences of opinion from their managers? Are there multiple avenues towards leadership positions? Do worker owners have a clear say in things that most affect them, like salary, benefits, hours? Because I know, frankly, we didn't always have that as worker owners. You know, we were really farmer focused, which was really strong. And I will, you know, like I'll always promote equal because of that, especially. But I think they could have done better on salary, frankly, you know, and having more of a voice. And is it like a cultural attitude that managers know best, or we're in this together and we all have value? And are there good avenues to clearly and transparently address issues of discrimination, from race to abilities to gender, etc.? Because like there's a lot of unlearning that we have to do as worker owners from our dominant culture. And so we really need to like be aware that just because we're co-op doesn't mean things are perfect, you know, or that we're immune to racism or sexism. So I think that can be more integrated into education, in my opinion. Thank you, Chuck.
Thank you. And you started to get into this last question a little bit, but maybe both of you can address it a little more, which is how have people in the co-op used their education that they've gotten from the co-op? So are there ways that people have developed personally, professionally, et cetera, through the education that the co-op has shared with them?
So speaking personally, I've worked at a number of cooperative businesses in Madison. And after coming here, I found that I got really interested in governance and really interested in kind of the nuts and bolts of how we process the revenue that we bring in, and was able to use the educational infrastructure that we had in place at that point, which was just a few years ago, but things have changed a lot. But just a few years ago, I was able to, you know, learn one-on-one with the people who developed a lot of the policies that we have in place now, who still work with us. And I felt very mentored by a lot of people that way, and was able to advance pretty quickly so that I felt comfortable being in more of a leadership role here. And I've seen over the course of the 4 years or so that I've been here, I've seen people who use their work experience here and their education to kind of have that be a scaffold to the higher education stuff that they wound up doing. We have somebody who used to be a president who went on to business school and is now working in our local government. We have one of the president in the last term, who had been the vice president previously, really likes to talk about how he was just sort of like a Joe off the street and came in answering phones. And as a Black man was able to, you know, pretty quickly rise to a leadership position at the cooperative without having to pretend that he was somebody he wasn't, and to really feel free to be able to use his intrinsic skills and the things that he'd learned working here to be able to feel comfortable as a leader here. And we see that over and over again, where people who are really dedicated to this cooperative and feel really strongly about their role and the role of worker cooperatives in our communities and what the good that can do. And they translate that into the work that they do after they leave us. We have a lot of people who've been here since the 90s who do other work and stay with us because of being able to have that connection still. And so I feel like in the last couple of years, it's been disappointing to me that we haven't had the resources to be able to invest in continued education for our members and that real, personal and career development aspect that we could bring as a business and as a, governance body and with committee work. We had an interesting example of this was that we had a member who was fresh out of the military, and he said that he felt really comfortable at Union because of how egalitarian that we were, where you didn't need to somehow do anything but the work that was required of you to be able to advance. And he felt like there was a good culture of equity in that way. And I didn't expect that coming from somebody. That was one of those things that kind of blew my mind, where I was thinking, okay, this person is from this very regimental background where, thinking about military structure and the way that people advance that way. And he actually saw mirrors of sort of the level playing field that that structure offers and that the cooperative can offer to people, where it doesn't matter who you are, you're able to advance because you feel, inspired to advance. And I think that's a really, important part of the cooperatives. I mean, one of the ways that I feel personally enriched by having had this time here is that I've been able to take my experience from all of the different jobs that I've worked at from the time that I was a teenager until now. And it didn't exactly matter how I gained the experience that I had to be able to put it into action here to make a difference here. But I was able to use my strengths and have that incorporated into the work that I do. And I think that people feel free to do that here, which is, I think, a really cool thing about where we work. And I see it, in the people who come here and they've never heard of a worker cooperative and they just came here to get a job, and they get excited about, once they learn about what they're doing a little bit more in depth, they get excited about it and decide that it sparks a passion that they never knew they had. And I think that when you have passionate people talking about the ways that their experience educates them and their formal training here educates them, you get good forward momentum in a way that's good for your business and in a way that's good for all the people who work here. I think education is one of those things where in sort of a more traditional career path, you have professional development you have to do. Like as a teacher, I would have to do professional development for a certain number of hours to keep my certification. And as an accountant to be, or an HR professional to be able to keep your certification, you have to keep advancing. And I feel like the life experience that people have learning with one another while owning and running a business together is clearly something that helps people and scaffolds them to be able to do different things with their experience and feel empowered to do that.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. Let's see, I guess at Equal Exchange, how people have used the education they've gotten at the co-op. So I'll share for me personally, I know that I learned so much, especially at that age. I was in my 20s, and it really helped me to understand some things that I had previously thought were over my head or inaccessible to be more accessible to me and able to implement in my work, like looking at sales numbers or finances or governance. Like I just didn't think I necessarily had that skill set or would ever have that skill set. So it really was special to be able to grow in that way. And there's a really strong community of learning, like the space where everyone's talking all the time, and little disagreements or agreements, and like passionate about all these issues, and it's very exciting and a place for growth, I think. So and then I also had some leadership opportunities that I may not have had at that point in my career or age. So like I was on the education committee or in charge of these national partnerships, and that was a big deal. So it like I mentioned before, it didn't necessarily translate to salary or professional development, but at the same time it was really meaningful. So they're not mutually exclusive is what I mean. There's a lot of good there for me. And so for staff, like you can, as soon as you're a member, you can become a leader of the education committee or governance leadership, like be on the board, or member owner body coordinator. So that's pretty cool. And then in general, like was mentioned, like staff over the years had movement throughout the company. Like there were a lot of staff that did move in different positions, and there are a lot of people who've been there at least a decade, and some since the start of the company in 1986. So that that's pretty great and cool. And there are also many people who have gone on to continue doing more in the co-op movement, whether like I think someone who was at Equal started Democracy Brewing in Boston, and another worker co-op. There are several co-op developers like at Industrial Commons, Project Equity, and yeah, so I think it's a really strong community, and like community of learning and dialogue and like education, and just like all the passion that they bring to that.
Great, thank you. Before we open up for questions from everyone, do you have questions for each other now that you've heard about each other's experiences? Are there any clarifications you want to ask for from each other?
I'm curious about how your education committee sort of comes up with curriculum and approves what you feel like you should be offering as education to your cooperative.
Oh, sure. So we would have like meetings, with the education committee and coordinators, and then we talk about like things that would come up. And so like, for example, we were talking about how, there were a lot of people who didn't speak English as their first language. So that became more on our radar, and we realized like, okay, like this needs to be translated into, like, we need to work on this in our materials. We want to translate our materials. We want to see, there was actually a teacher, an English teacher, who would come in like independently of education committee, who would come and have classes. So we started working a little bit more with her. So, I think like one of the things I learned was, or feel like was helpful in addressing issues, was when there's like a complaint, how does that translate into something to be addressed? Yeah. So how do you guys do that? Like, what's your take on that?
It's been sort of the same. I mean, so the cooperative here is pretty old. So it's been around for a little more than 43 years. And there have been ebbs and flows in the way that people have done things with education committee, and it all had a little bit to do with the culture of the co-op at the time. And there were some things that were like prescribed, like we had to do this sort of education for people. And I think we've just, in the last 5 years, even especially because of the pandemic, I think, have been trying to figure out ways that we can offer training that can help people develop personally to be better as a professional worker. And so those are the only ways we've been able to afford to do it. Like, we've been using sort of education in our peer review system. So if there are interpersonal conflicts that get to a level where discipline might need to be involved, or there are other issues that have to do with customer service, or the way that we interact departmentally with each other, and there are problems, we're able to sort of adjust to that and be like, okay, it looks like people really need to get some education about this or that. And so we're able to sort of do it piecemeal. But when we were dreaming bigger, we were trying to think about ways that we could provide education to the membership at large, and whether or not there'd be buy-in to have that education. Like, that was one of the things that we ran into, is like, how engaged are people that they would want to take, another class about this, that, or the other that might help them, become more experienced in our field, or, in a professional track in our business or something like that. And so I think we'd sort of, I feel like we use education a little bit defensively sometimes, where it's like, we don't know we need to do it until it's a problem. We're like, oh, geez, okay, well, education's the answer here. And so I think that one of the things that we try to do, at least when we're, as an education committee, when we're talking about what we want to be able to provide to the co-op membership and possibly the community, is just to kind of anticipate needs that are happening culturally in our co-op and be able to help people learn about those things. So it's I guess I feel a little sad that we have to be reactive more than being able to kind of predict what's coming down the pike, or be able to have the resources to offer things that we would really love to be able to offer people. But I mean, I think it sounds pretty similar to what you guys do too, where it's like you have a need that you find, and you're like, oh, I hadn't anticipated that need, but what'll fix it? Education. So I guess it's kind of the same.
Thanks.
Yeah. Does anyone in the room have any questions for Esther or JP about any of the things they talked about or didn't talk about?
Or to share your experience with
Yeah, I was going to say, if you don't have questions, I'm going to ask you the same questions that the panelists answered. So I see a hand from Pat.
Hi. Whoops. My page keeps disappearing. Sorry about that. What I was wondering is, we're a very new co-op, and really not too many of us have ever done it before. And I was really interested in what you just said about how sometimes the education part just never really got addressed. We were all kind of knew what a co-op was, and of course it's been a very steep learning curve getting constitutions and bylaws and everything down. and starting the business. But what you said about sometimes we haven't gotten really to co-op beyond putting posters of the principles up on the wall. And what you said about sometimes it's a reactive process. Are there resources available for helping educate our members? We don't have a lot right now. We want to grow more membership, but yeah, we've already run into some of those problems where, although people were enthusiastic about being a co-op, I don't think they really got it. They didn't really understand what it was all about. So I'll be quiet and listen.
I guess you got it, you want? Or a first shot. Thank you. Yeah, no, Pat, where is your co-op? Is it in Madison?
No, it's not. It's a small co-op that just started in Monticello. We're attempting to feed people in the Sugar River watershed, that
Oh.
food. And so it started during the pandemic, just as a pilot program for how we could get farmers' food out to people who needed it because the grocery stores were bare and our farmers needed markets. And so we started one meal a week that we delivered. And so it's going now. We've got the co-op going, but I think we have some members who didn't realize what a big time commitment it would be, or didn't realize, like I said, didn't really understand the co-op principles. Maybe they were unaware of business, just plain business, like that businesses fail and businesses run through money really fast when they're starting up, and they might not make a big profit the first year, and maybe our projections were too wildly optimistic, or just those kinds of things. And so now that we're there and we're 6 months in, it's like, okay, so now we need to do that education. And where do we begin? What resources are there to help us get going at it?
I feel like this is a great place to start. Like, and that peer-to-peer peer-to-peer learning, like from each other, and just like calling up another co-op and saying, hey, could we have a talk together, like a group talk or something like that. And then the US Federation of Worker Co-ops has a ton of resources. So it might be like a video or a movie, or you could all attend a workshop together or something like. But if you have your group sit down and just watch something together and then talk about it, that could be something maybe you take 2 hours one night, even if it's once a month or something.
Could you put that link or the name of that group in the chat for me, please, and I'll write it down.
Will do. Yeah, sounds good.
Thank you.
And then also the US, you're in Wisconsin, right? So yeah. So the UW Center for Co-ops could be a good resource.
We've worked with them a lot. Yeah. They were really helpful with our setting up our bylaws and just setting up the co-op business.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, been working with them.
I just want to highlight something Esther said, which is doing something together as a group. I think that can have a lot of power. Often we think of education as the focus is what are we learning? But I think the how we learn it can be really important. And I think sometimes having everyone on the same page, even if you all hate the video, that can make, that's an experience that you've had together. And you can then talk about why did we hate what they suggested doing for our co-op? Why won't that work for us? But doing things as a group, I think it helps support each other, but it also helps build a community of people working together. So yeah, I really want to highlight that part that Esther mentioned of doing things together. And JP, did you want to respond at all?
Yeah, I want to double down on that camaraderie piece, because I think that part of the reason why our co-op has lasted so long is that we really love each other a lot. Like the people that are committed to this business, and I think people are pretty excited about it when they first come here, being able to actually feel like you're a part of something. Like we often joke about how we're the island of misfit toys, where we come from, a lot of us come from non-traditional backgrounds, and we joke that we have more people with master's degrees and doctorates who are, you know, cab drivers than, you know, I mean, like working in their chosen field. And I think that there is something really important about learning from one another as you go through all the bumps, you know. So one of the things that we've been going through lately is sort of a need to restructure. Like I always kind of think of the cooperative as a culture in itself, and I always think of culture as a living thing. It's something that changes and grows, and you have to kind of keep up with it and foster it, and it's different no matter, you know, who's involved. It's going to change. And so we've had a number of different business models where, you know, we've had like management central, we've had team management, we've had hierarchical management, and it appears that we're at a point where we're thinking about a sea change again with this. And one of the resources that I've been going back to is the School for Democratic Management. That's been really helpful for me. It's not something that offers a lot of tools that are it won't fit us exactly, but there are a lot of interesting things to be gleaned from the work that they do. So I would recommend them. I can stick a link in the chat. I've been going back to them a lot in the conversations that we've been having. I think that it's really difficult to anticipate how much a brand new cooperative is going to be facing. One of the things that ties back to like when we were talking about what education has had other people kind of do with themselves, we have a couple of cooperatives that have branched off of ours in a sense, where we've had people who were working at our cooperative and decided that their other business ventures should become cooperatives. And so we've been working, I've been working personally with another member who has a journalism cooperative that we're founding. And getting when you're right at the ground floor of that and trying to figure out how to map it all out, I think it can be super overwhelming, and the peer-to-peer part of that is really, really important. Like one of the things that just bowls me over all the time is my Google Drive. Like I've been given access to like basically the whole archives of this 43-year-old cooperative, and I check there first before like I go on the internet or anything. I'm like how has this happened before, you know, and come up with so many materials. And it's like, okay, let's not reinvent the wheel. We might be able to use something we learned in 1998 that could, you know, inform what we're doing now. And one of the, you know, principles that we work on is that we want to help all the other cooperatives. So, you know, we want to make ourselves available. So if there's any kind of questions that you have that are things that we might have run into and we have resources for you, we will happily share those with you too. So I think that being in touch with other cooperatives is really important. And I also think the SHRM is really handy for worker cooperatives too. It's sort of a little bit more of a, it's geared a little bit more toward corporate work, but it has a lot of interesting solutions for little things that pop up and how that interacts with the law. So I would say that SHRM is a nice thing to keep your eye on too as a developing co-op. So those are it's the Society for Human Resources Management, I believe is their full name. I'll put a link to them too. We have one member at the co-op that subscribes to it. Like we have one member who's in it, and then we just all are able to use the login and the resources from it. So they have a lot of toolkits for, like right now we're changing the way we do evaluations, which is super loaded and a wacky endeavor for, you know, making sure that we're really living up to our values and the way that we work together. So I've been having a lot of interesting questions answered and new questions created by looking at their stuff. So I'll stick the DAWI link in the chat as well as the SHRM, especially just for like budding cooperatives that are brand new. I think it's nice. That site's nice because it has a lot of information about how these things intersect to state law and city laws too for employment stuff. So that can be super, I've found it to be really, really helpful.
I see a hand from Mike.
Yes, thank you all for sharing these stories. Very valuable. I arrive as someone who is not technically a worker owner in a cooperative. I am in a handful of self-managed collectives, and also a worker self-directed nonprofit. But I'm also effectively a roaming TA. I deliberately do not institutionally attach, just because I know there's this real sort of tension around that, occasionally. But I am very interested in what would be most helpful here as someone who is very intrigued by trying to support the cultivation of worker cooperatives and an ecosystem that really kind of, there were two sides that I heard here, right? There's one worker cooperative that had a very well-structured educational program, or at least, deeply structured. And there may be some other sort of, critiques that were named there. And there's one that's, really trying to kind of move forward inside of this economic space that we're in. And wondering where would external support be most helpful to foster education inside of these cooperative spaces. Certainly I've heard that, and I'm working on currently with a local incubator, just this 12-week cooperative culture curriculum, which part of it is really about like, hey, principle 5, don't forget it. Like, don't ever forget it. But where would external support be best placed so that cooperatives have the things that they need to continue cultivating education, even when there's some economic dynamics that don't afford it? Check.
I feel like mutual aid comes into play a little bit here too, where if you have services or product that you can barter for education, that can be a helpful thing. We've been finding that we just don't know enough about many of the things that we feel we need to be educated about without going to outside sources. And because of our dedication to co-ops, working with co-ops, and wanting to, support, fiscally support, or through mutual aid support organizations that have similar values to prop each other up, that we've been looking into a lot of local organizations and agencies for potentially kind of contracting out for education. So that's one of the things that we're as we're kind of getting some revenue back enough that we can afford to offer mutual aid or afford to pay these smaller organizations that are able to provide education to us. We don't have the resources internally to be able to learn the stuff we don't already know, right? So we need to be able to go outside. And now that we're getting to a spot again where we're going to be able to invest in that sort of thing, that's one of the really important things that we're looking at, is how can we network with other cooperatives to get education that we need and provide education that they might need, or other organizations in our community. So
and I think that's a really good, important question. And I have been on both sides a little bit to some degree. We all have different experiences, but I've been both, the worker co-op and the co-op developer, and And I'm trying to transition that thinking in like in my new role at Ajani into like, I'm trying to frame it more as like co-op organizer, like community organizer, you know, versus like developer. So yeah, so I think like a big thing is number one, like meeting people where they're at. So, and you know, I know you know this already, you know, but I think, you know, that's a big thing, like where people like, how do they prefer to engage, you know, ask them or talk with them, you know, just get to know them as people some, and then like ask what they would like, and then and I think, you know, having like this equal approach, like we are building something together versus I'm depositing my knowledge upon the, you know, kind of deal. You know, again, like I know you know this, but but just to say articulate it. And then I think too, I see a lot of focus by like co-op developers on particular content and in a particular presentation type style. And oh no, thanks. And so I think like a lot of the conversation can be deep diving into these highly complicated things like bylaws or finances. They can be extremely inaccessible to people if you have not heard these things. So how do we start with the human focus? And then I try to start with like, okay, so what do you want to see together? And then here's how, and then, you know, that can be like, here's how we translate in the bylaws, you know, versus starting with the bylaws and then, you know, and I think like, also focusing on things that matter to folks besides like making sure that people's interests are being brought up in the education or the industry. Like it's really important to have a good business that can be, you know, like I don't see that always shared as much by developers or talked about as much. Like how do you incorporate that to your education? And then I really liked what my father used to do when he was around. He had a co-op. He was like a community organizer and did worker co-ops in Cincinnati, and he would bring in psychologists as outside like trainers and engage people like the worker owners like because again this is a huge like cultural shift. So I think having some of that element of that very human element into the work can be really beautiful and help with the interaction and the discussion and what that means in practice part. So those are my thoughts. Thank you for listening.
I think there's really something to that too. I mean, I know for me, I had like, I started being a marketing representative and I didn't really understand budgeting at all or how to read financial statements at all. And I think I've been kind of in my life a bit of a fake it till you make it kind of person, and was trying really hard, and you know, often had some imposter syndrome, feeling like, oh, okay, I'm here, I'm the guy making the budget, like how did this happen, you know? And I think that there's something to cooperative education that's like the imposter syndrome buster, where it's like, no, you can absolutely understand how to do this, it's accessible to you. And that's I think something that we forget a lot here even, and something that I think we should consider when we're onboarding new people into the cooperative is just how accessible that stuff can be. That there's really not a, you know, there shouldn't be a barrier between the people who process the revenue versus the people that generate the revenue. Like we're just as powerful as one another in being able to understand how our business works. And I think that a lot of the divisions that get drawn in organizations tend to be people kind of feeling like they're on the outside, and being able to continually sort of foster that open door. It can be something you forget about sometimes, I think. So yeah.
And I had a couple thoughts too. because those are some great thoughts. I'll try to organize my thoughts in an order that makes sense. But I think one piece is that, I think it'd be great if there was more external funding for co-op education available, because I think it's hard to budget for education, because even though I think everyone here recognizes that it's really critical, when the budget is tight, it's one of the easier things to cut because it doesn't keep the lights on in the same way that other things do. And I think another piece is in terms of mutual aid and like just peer support and talking to other co-ops. I think it's also important to remember that newer co-ops can offer things to more experienced co-ops too. That like sometimes when you've been around for a while, you have a lot of things that you've tried and done, and maybe someone who's new is thinking about things in a totally different way. And I think even just sharing curriculum with each other, because I think both of you talked a little bit about like sort of defensive education, like we don't know what we need until it comes up. I think the more we can sort of share with each other, not even like doing the education, but just saying like, here's the things we've trained people on over the years, can help bring up for co-ops like, oh, we should probably think about conflict training, or we should probably think more about how we train people to read budgets. So I think even sharing that level of information, even if it's not doing the actual training for each other, can be really valuable and help us see what we are missing in our organizations and co-ops. Yeah. I guess I would sum that up as saying like mutual aid doesn't have to be just goods and services. It can also be knowledge exchange.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of times with this co-op, the people who've been here for a really long time can sometimes be the most kind of obstructionist about wanting to try things a new way, where, if there's a kind of a new guard that comes in and is like, oh, I think we should try this, we get a lot of, oh, we've done that before, it didn't work because of this, and this. And it's like, well, it wasn't 2022 when that happened, so maybe we should reconsider it, and I think that there's something to living in that kind of uncomfortable realm of being wrong. Like we should all be ready to be a little bit wrong about things that we think we know when it comes to trying to run these businesses together. And I think that the ways that we can lift each other up as worker owners in our different businesses, and the ways that we have shared in different experiences is so important, because there are, questions that I had answered that I didn't even know I had by hearing Esther today, so it's just even getting together and networking the way MedWork provides, the way that we can kind of gather as interested parties in this stuff is really, that's kind of the part of the fifth principle that we don't know we're doing, it's at work, right now, and anytime we exchange ideas. So I think it's really important to meet this way.
Something that I saw a co-op try once, and I don't know how well it worked, but they decided to try out the idea that if a new proposal for how to do something didn't pass, they had to re-vote on the status quo. They couldn't just default to keeping it. They had to actually like reach consensus on it. And I think the idea was sort of like, it's easy to say no to trying new things because we have a way we're doing it. But what if most of us don't like the way we're doing it? We need to like continue the consensus process to try to keep forming new ideas. And I don't know that that's the best way to do it, because that might lead you to having no policy in place about something quite critical. But, I think anything that encourages the idea that like, if we're going to say no to a new proposal, let's look at what we don't like about what we're currently doing and see if we can continue the discussion so that we meet something that meets the needs of the co-op where it's at now.
I think that's like extra prescient because it seems, I mean, to me personally, from what I'm seeing around, is that it seems like the whole economy and the whole worker body of our country is reconsidering how they work and why they work and what they want to do. And being able to be flexible with that and hear what people are saying is really important. And I think how that kind of translates into shaking up the paradigms that we're used to in a co-op, especially an old co-op like Union, where, you know, we've tried it all before, it only works this way. And, you know, a lot of people seem to feel really shut down by that. Like newer people who are really passionate about it run into that kind of attitude and they're like, oh, that person just doesn't like my idea, or they think I'm dumb, or you know, and it's like, no, we really need to reconsider, you know, is this working for us? Why are we trying the same thing over and over again if it's not working for us? Let's think of something new. And it does take a lot of effort and administrative work and a lot of money to shift things in a co-op. And so it's a little bit scary to pull the trigger on new structural things. But I think that we should be willing to hear each other out in those ways and really foster the passion of younger people who might have less experience in the cooperative culture and the cooperative movement, who might have fresh ideas that we've never even considered, or we could consider old ideas in a new way because of the way they present them.
Do folks have other questions or thoughts?
I just want a second, like this conversation is so refreshing. It's like, I feel like there's so much power and I've just, you know, I feel like I've been wanting to talk with other people about this for a long time and it just feels really good, you know, and healthy. So thank you, Rick and everyone.
Agreed, this has been great.
Yeah, I'd just like to emphasize a couple of things. And Abby, I do want to hear from you because I do get up to Minneapolis, St. Paul, and I'd love to chat about the whole food thing and how with the best intentions, sometimes getting the organization to happen doesn't always come naturally to us. The other thing I really appreciated was you talking about how we may need to remember that we were a group of really passionate people who wanted to pull this off. And that sometimes we get bogged down in the details or the budget or those things, and we forget how to have fun with each other. We forget that we really cared about each other. Sometimes it is easier to have a facilitator, I think, come in as the expert on things like budget or how to set up your page or how to do your QuickBooks, so that we don't create internal. We've been trying to get by on a shoestring, just doing it all ourselves. And I think sometimes that sets us up for, oh, they're the experts, so either they'll do all the work or, oh, they think they know it all, and so I'll never be able to do it, so just let them do it. And then that leads to all kinds of non-transparency and problems. So perhaps having an outside facilitator for that stuff and then having fun with each other when we are together. So I really appreciate all of your insights. Thank you.
One thing I'll respond with is to your point about sort of remembering why you're all together. I was part of a women's group a long time ago, and every meeting started with reading our mission statement out loud. And there was something kind of refreshing about that, to like start meetings with a reminder, a very concrete reminder, like we all agreed to this, and this is why we're here. And so we're going to read it. And that's sort of like, we're not going to do like the Pledge of Allegiance or anything like that, because that's not our values, but our values are these things that we've written down. And, you know, mission statements aren't usually super long, so it's not like it takes a long time to do that, but it can be a nice reminder, like, as you transition from like regular life to a meeting, why are we in this meeting?
I wanted to say too, you just reminded me of something kind of important, and it's about reports. And that's an important thing about education in organizations and cooperatives. We have a lot of baked in reports that are due at certain times about certain things. And I'm not sure that we even use them anymore, but we still produce them. And it seems like a waste of time a lot of times. And so we're having kind of an audit of that and trying to figure out how we can best inform our cooperative body and our board so that we're all on the same page. And I feel like sometimes it can be easy to kind of fall into a little bit of bureaucracy without meaning to. I mean, like well-meaning bureaucracy, and that you should always be a little bit willing to shake it up and figure out if what you're doing is really serving you. And there's something to considering your mission and considering, you know, is it worth it? Like sometimes we get so frustrated and we have to stop ourselves and think, is it worth it? Is this place worth it? Is what we're doing worth it? And I think most of us here always come back to, yes, absolutely, it's worth it. But sometimes stopping and thinking about it can give you new ideas too about how it can be better.
This is Neural with Chi Commons Cooperative. Sorry to be late to this conversation, but one thing that occurs to me about education, and I don't know if it's been mentioned it before, is as a technology and professional services cooperative, you know, technology is always changing. So we're always having to like research ahead of our clients, ahead of the market, figure out what's wrong. And some of it involves trial, error, experimentation, doing things that have not been done before, and frankly, failing. And I think unless you're sort of taught that that's okay, or to limit the risk that you do take, it's not something that comes naturally to our sort of more, you know, play it safe type of mentality.
So are you a cooperative?
Yes,
Can
we
you
are.
name
Yeah.
that organization? Yeah.
We are worker-owned technologies and professional service cooperatives. So we do things like help clients get websites, improve their operations through seeing what their processes are like, facilitation, so a variety of things. But we're always having to figure out, and things that we haven't quite done before.
The reason I ask is that we've invested in things like marketing and QuickBooks Pro and things like that, but we're finding that we just don't have the people trained to actually do the bookkeeping or do the taxes or keep up with the licensing and things like that. That's something that your cooperative helps with?
Actually, yeah, bookkeeping and accounting is a sore point with us too, because we didn't have anybody as a worker owner who was an accountant, but that would have been great to have. So we're trying to figure that out, but we're like, for instance, what office suite to choose. Like, do you want to choose Google? Do you want to choose Microsoft? Do you want to use something open source? We happen to go with an outfit called Zoho, which also has accounting software, which is a competitor to QuickBooks. But because we're doing sort of a path that's a little bit less traveled, we're making mistakes, but we're trying to sort of, learn from the mistakes, because we don't have all the answers.
Well, good luck.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rick. I was going to mention that you just put in the chat. That's a really good thing. We're a co-op that has a lot of pencil and paper things that we still do, and people who are very reluctant, and the younger of us, well, I'm not even in that group, but a lot of the younger people are like, this is learned helplessness. You won't embrace technology. And we're like, shut up. We like our paper. And we're starting to realize that we have kind of a lot of things that are going to need to move into the technology sphere that haven't been there yet. And we're kind of desperate at this point to figure out a good cooperative resource for finding this sort of software, like HR software that we might need, or financial software that could work for us better, or the different ways that technology is kind of colliding with us, and making for change. And this is, I want to gush a little bit about how great MadWork is for having access to other cooperatives and other places that offer services that might be the exact thing that you're looking for. And I need to even be better about checking in and figuring out what we can find out about our own problems. But I think it's just super special and cool that we're able to come together in this way as a broader community and talk about our challenges and think of solutions together. So I thank you a lot for inviting me here and giving me the opportunity to come and talk to you and being able to hear from you all.
Yeah, we are at time. We're actually a little past time. But I really want to thank Esther and JP for sharing so much information. But I also want to thank everyone who's here for participating in so much conversation, sharing links in the chat, sharing stories about your experiences. We have 8 minutes before the next session starts, which will be in this room. And the next session is going to be our co-op video tours. So I'm going to stop recording now. And feel free to take a break, but we'll have the Zoom open if you want to stick around.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.